Today is Easter Sunday, and I want to talk a little bit about the tradition, about the truth, and about the spiritual meaning of this week. Today marks the culmination of the most important week in the Christian calendar. The events of Holy Week and Easter represent the central message of the Christian faith. It is impossible to overstate how this simple fact, if it were not for this, that in particular the belief in the literal resurrection of Jesus, there would be no Christianity. The life and the story of Jesus would have gone the way of many, many other similar stories of the time. Last Sunday, I said that Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday is like a two-part series to be continued. But for the seekers, like us, it is a three-part series. The third part has to do with questioning what really happened and how did the traditional Christian message eventually pan out. Next week, I'm going to talk about this when I do a lesson that is called, it's a great courses lesson called How Jesus Became God. And it's very, very interesting. For now, though, let's return to Judea, some 2,000 plus years ago, where we left off last week. The week begins with a massive gathering of the Jewish faithful in celebration of the Passover festival. As a member of the Jewish community, Jesus came to Jerusalem to participate in that celebration. And as a reminder, Jews, it says, Jews, and I'm saying everybody in the Bible was a Jew, remember that. They celebrated Passover as a commemoration of the liberation by God from the slavery in ancient Egypt and their freedom as a newfound nation under the leadership of Moses. The Exodus story tells us that God sent 10 plagues to the Egyptian people in order that they would free the Israelites from captivity. And it was finally the 10th one and the worst of the plagues that finally released the Israelites. And that plague was the death of the Egyptian firstborn. And so the Israelites were instructed that to mark their doorposts with the stain of the blood of a slaughtered spring lamb. And upon seeing the stain on the door, then the Spirit of God would pass over that door and go on to the next one. And thus we get the name of the Passover festival. And so for inquiring minds such as me, please note that the use of the blood of a lamb in this story, because that was the manner in which the Jews celebrated their sacrificial offerings on the Sabbath. It was a very, very common practice. And hence, therein lies the eventual connection to Jesus as the sacrificial lamb. This is the way they thought in that time. Sacrifice, the shedding of blood, was a normal part of the Sabbath activity. Evidently, not only there, but around the world, because we know, like, I've read about the Aztecs. I don't know if you knew about them, but they had this ritual in which they would take people who were alive and cut their hearts out in offering to the gods while they were alive. This was a practice. Now, can you imagine that if we here in Unity now were to sacrifice a lamb as part of our activity today, how would that be seen by the community or by other churches? You think it might come off as a bit barbaric? Maybe. It probably would. But yet, and again, touchy subject. But that's what the 2 billion, whatever it is, Christians are celebrating a sacrifice this week. And not of a lamb, but of God's only Son. And I know this is touchy ground, and I totally get it. But anytime I bring up touchy ground, I'm not doing it to be critical or to judge. We're very clear in Unity, and somebody asked me this morning, that everybody is on their own journey, and everybody is where they are because that's where they are in their consciousness. Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore said, "We are always living our consciousness." Well, of course we are. When I was a child, I thought like a child. That's what it says. But when I grew up, I left my childish ways behind. And that's what that's saying, that we're always living our consciousness. So in Unity, we respect everybody where they are in all positions. We're not here to criticize anybody about anything. What we're looking for, though, is to offer to those people who are seeking another answer, another way of seeing things that perhaps makes a little bit more sense. I call it breaking the spell that we're under from that old, archaic model of the universe in which there is a God that would be capable even of sending 10 plagues to anybody, Egyptians or whoever. And so when I came to Unity, I found my spiritual home because I found people who were comfortable with being uncomfortable about established beliefs and questioning things. People who are willing to say to tradition, I don't get it. I don't understand how that works. But that's how you unfold spiritually, how you grow. If you recall early on, I told you that when I was growing up a Catholic, Christian Catholic, I always had this feeling about Christianity. I always felt like something is right about it, but something is wrong about it for me. And it took me a long time to finally understand what that was. And I've been talking about it lately. And it is that it is the same story that we talk about in Unity, but it is seen from a different perspective, from one that you might say is a higher perspective. So it's not about the story. I keep saying this over and over. It's about the interpretation of the story. So yes, God did come into this world in the Christmas story, but not as a man, but as a humanity, as all of us, as everything. And yes, there is suffering, but not by design. That's not God's plan. It is because we go through this unfolding in human experience, and there's bumps along the way. This is the way it works. And the events of this week, from the Christian perspective, is a culmination of that journey. It is about our overcoming power. To overcome even what we consider the biggest obstacle we will ever face, death. Because at the end of all the story, the question is this: what happens to us when we die? And the story tells us that we resurrect. Not literally, of course, we know, because we are not fundamentally physical beings. It's a spiritual resurrection because we are fundamentally spiritual beings having a human experience, we say in Unity. We live on because we are in this world, but we're not of this world. That's why we live on. Hebrews puts it this way: so that things which are seen were not made of things which do appear. Now, in plain English, that says everything is made of quantum soup. And quantum soup is eternal. That's what we call it now. I don't know what it is. It's quantum soup. So, of course, we live on. This is the true message of Easter for me. It is not that he has risen, it is that Spirit has risen, because Spirit continues on. But for the sake of the story, let's go back a little bit to the story, and let's look at it a little bit and see how it played out. And so as I move forward through the traditional interpretation, I will be interjecting spiritual meanings along the way. And so I want to point out the three major things going on in the procession coming into Jerusalem and in the events of the week. And one of them is what I just said, the overcoming power, our overcoming power, the resurrection. The second is about spiritual journey in relationship to our unfolding. I call it, what procession are you on? And the third is about how we respond to the events that happen to us during our lifetime. I call this part, living in the third day. So let's explore these two ideas. What procession are you on? Last week we talked about Jesus coming into Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. His ministry now had been going on for about 3 years, and he had developed the reputation of being a miracle worker. And many believed him to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah, the new king who was going to set up a kingdom for the Jewish people and overthrow the oppressive Roman Empire that was confining them, that was holding them down. So it is said that Jesus came into town riding a donkey because, one, they said it was to fulfill the scripture, because in Zechariah it says Zion, your son will come in riding in a donkey, or whatever words to that effect. And second, because according to folklore, riding a donkey represented coming in peace, in triumph. So many people followed him in this procession as he came into town. Spiritually, this following of these masses is the material thoughts that are following this higher consciousness because they want to unfold into a greater awareness. That's what it means spiritually. And the streets were lined with palm leaves, because that represents a triumph of sorts too. So there was great joy and great celebration, not only in remembrance of the Passover when they were freed from the Egyptian slavery, but of the new liberation that was now under the Roman oppression. The Jewish people were under right now. They believed, they hoped that this liberation from the Roman oppression was imminent, was going to happen really soon. Maybe it starts this week with a new king coming to town. So think about that. There was great joy about the past, and even greater joy about what was coming. This procession was one of love, of peace, of hope, of joy, and of a new kingdom, about the awakening spiritually of our higher self. But there was another procession going on too, a very different procession. The Romans were fully aware of this supposed new king that was coming into town, who was among the midst. Now, how do you think they felt about that? In anticipation of this upcoming event, the Roman Empire had sent some 20,000 soldiers to Jerusalem. But still, there was about 200,000 Jews who had come into town. So they were outnumbered, the soldiers were outnumbered 10-1. And they had one goal, and one goal only, to keep control, to make sure everything remained peaceful. And their instructions was, do not let anything disrupt anything in any way. Nothing. This procession was completely about power. It was about control, about dominion and suppression. It was about the dark side of the human nature, one resisting the change of a coming new, higher kingdom. Two processions, one of spirit, one of law, all coming together. The third point was living in the third day. My reference here to that is how we react to situations that arise in our lives. Because that's what we say all the time, right? Sometimes we don't have control over the things that happen to us, but we have control over how we respond to them. There is our power in that. Jesus came to the city, and what's the first thing he did? He went to the temple and overthrew the tables because he thought that it was blasphemous or whatever, that they were selling the money exchangers, and they were selling the lambs for sacrifice and stuff. And so he just kind of lost it. And he overthrew everything. Not a good start for the whole journey. So by the end of the week, he would be arrested, tried, and ultimately crucified. And when Friday came around, his disciples and followers were nowhere to be found. They did not understand why their new, soon-to-be king had been crucified. It didn't make any sense to them. They were not expecting this. Nowhere in the Hebrew scripture does it say that the Messiah was going to die. The Messiah was going to take over. And so they couldn't make sense of it. But in truth, they never understood that Jesus was never talking about a kingdom in this world. He was talking about a spiritual kingdom. He always was. They misunderstood him. But the only ones that stayed through him through thick and thin were, guess who? The women. Yeah. They were the only ones there when everything took place. Spiritually, Good Friday, the day of the crucifixion, is any time we are overcome by the most dramatic and fear-filled emotions the human experience can possibly muster. That's the Good Friday. In simple terms, Good Friday is humanity at our worst. It is the Inquisition. It is the Holocaust. It is the slavery. It is war. It is our intolerance. It is our injustice. It is our bigotry. It is our ignorance. That is Good Friday. And our ignorance crucified our divinity. That's what happened in the story from a spiritual perspective. Our ignorance crucified our divinity. Don't live in that day. That's the message. Don't live in that day. And don't be in the procession that chooses control over love. Be in the divine procession. Be in the pursuit of peace and love and harmony and a higher reality. Live in the third day, the day of the resurrection, when there was a birth of a new and higher consciousness, that third day. So if something comes up in your life and it looks like a Good Friday event, something that would really put you in that frame of mind that meant the power, well, like we saw in the Capitol. You know, when you get that massive people and you're overcome by this ugly hatred power, and you're overcome by it. Don't live in that day, because the greater day is coming. That's the message of that, living in the third day. So the message of unity of Easter is telling us to rise up to a new reality, one guided by our higher spiritual nature and not our lower human nature. Can I get a little bit of music down, please? Let's take a few moments then to contemplate today's message. I invite you to take a few deep breaths and to be present in this moment. Be at peace. With an open mind and an open heart, allow Spirit to vibrate your entire physical body with the healing energy of love, peace, and harmony. We move out of the possession of control, of power, of judgment, and of injustice. We release everything associated with those energies. They no longer serve us. We take a step back from the daily events that crucify us. We do not allow the dark side of the human nature to react to whatever negative events that present themselves in our human experience. Instead, we trust that this too shall pass and wait the resurrection of the higher response the third day always brings. And in doing so, that which has kept us in the tomb of ignorance and limitation lifts the door of our restrictions and invites us into the resurrection experience of a new and higher reality. Our soul is filled with great joy, for we have been raised up into a new presence. You, the Spirit within us all, has raised us up, and so it is.